teachers at Reddit. Who is one standout student that you'll remember for a very long time? I'm married to a teacher. One kid decided to share fun news that his family had burned their restaurant to the ground on the weekend to claim the insurance money. Not necessarily a standout for positive reasons, but I once had a student arrested in the middle of class for robbing 3 separate banks across state lines. I'll certainly never forget that. I had a student with autism who was a carbon copy of Napoleon Dynamite. Great sense of dry humor that I really enjoyed. He's still around town and works at a convenience store. Whenever I go in there to buy beer, he'll casually walk by me, wag a finger and, in cartoon fashion, whisper moderation. I teach first. I have a student with high anxiety if I'm not there. I had a funeral for my grandpa, so I front-loaded him with something like "My grandpa went to heaven, so I won't be here tomorrow. So and so will be the sub." He said okay, walked away, then came back a few minutes later and hugged me and said, "I'm sorry about your grandpa. You don't see much empathy from 6-year-olds. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment." The kid that brought dry ice to school, wrote "duck you" on the wall with his own it, put kid soap sculptures into the microwave in the teacher's lounge, downloaded porn on a school computer, humped a dodgeball multiple times, laid under his desk and humped the ground, called from the classroom phone to order pizza, and whose father emailed me 3 times a day, every day, for the entire year, all while CCing the superintendent on every email. That was a great year. My first year working in education, there was one kid that was super creative. He could turn anything into a game. He made a game with dominoes one time that I couldn't for the life of me beat, and I was seriously trying. He later confided in me that his ex-stepfather had hit his mom and been to jail several times. It broke my heart because he and his siblings were the sweetest kids. He said to me once, "I think we're all teachers," and that quote still rings true, 7 years later. I teach 8th grade. Last year, we lost one of our students in an accident right before fall break. From day one, he had been my favorite student. He was unbelievably kind and intelligent. Literally every single student had only positive things to say about him. I know that's typically how it goes when someone passes, but it wasn't like that with him. He was just one of those people you couldn't help but love. He was someone who would go out of his way to help those around him, and he brought out the best in his peers. A born leader. Then we lost him. I floundered for the rest of the year. I never felt like I completely regained my footing. I'm thankful for the time I had with him in my class, but I'm terrified of having to go through that again. The first one who died tragically young after graduation. He reminded me of my oldest son, and was the most genuine and kind young man. He wasn't an especially good student, just a wonderful person. I teach where there was a school shooting. My student was shot and almost died. She survived because a specialist happened to be in town. When I visited with her in the hospital a couple days after, she asked how she could finish the class. Her drive was impressive. I had an international female student who started a family in an English-speaking country with a male from her home country. She was becoming Americanized, to her husband's dismay, so he kidnapped the baby back to his home country. For complicated reasons, the woman could not simply go back to her home country without disastrous consequences. The whole saga was absolutely heartbreaking. I have no idea how it turned out. I had one super sassy student who would always grimace when asked a question and give minimal effort in anything related to class. One day our school had a Halloween party and I was helping with a magic show when she ran up to me with her friend and said, "This is my favorite teacher," to her friend. She was smiling so much and so happy, and from that day on she was a brilliant kid showing her true potential. Always high five everyone in your class and make them blossom, fellow teachers. One of my former students just ran into a burning house the other day to save a family with no thought to his own safety. So, he is on my mind right now. It is hard to really pin down because there have been so many. I had one kid who is going to college and getting into politics, and he should. He took on a superintendent and won. For the good of all his peers. Pretty awesome. Not in the news, but pretty awesome. I think I will always remember him. Update. For those of you interested, the story of Iroquois Boris He is still living. By former, I meant he graduated. Taught high school theater and discovered a notebook that was being passed around mentioning a lot of high school drinking. So, one night instead of rehearsal, we staged an intervention with the cast of the show. We kept things very vague, let the kids know we cared about them and talked to them frankly about some of our own experiences with addiction and depression. At the end of it, one student, someone who was not even mentioned in the notebook and I would have never suspected any of the things we talked about applied to him, pulled me aside and said, "I don't know how you guys figured it out, but yeah, I've been cutting, and I really appreciate you not calling me out in there." He got help soon thereafter, and is living a healthy life to this day. I worked in a remote community in Australia. We don't usually get highly motivated kids, as they have their own problems in life. They don't eat every day and usually only get a couple of hours of sleep a night, but this boy was incredibly happy to be at school, loved his art and was incredibly intelligent for his age in a range of subjects. To put this into perspective, most kids we deal with at the age of 13 have the same education level as 4-5-year-olds. Anyway, he and his family were driving on unsealed roads where the drunk father rolled the car going over 120 km/h. Not uncommon. Everyone else was okay, but he was sitting on his mum's lap without a seatbelt. He was thrown out of the car and rolled on. Was very sad because he was by far the smartest student we have ever had and one of the few who had aspirations other than being a drug dealer or doing nothing with their life. He wanted to be a doctor to help people like his grandma who was on constant dialysis. We had roughly 8 out of over 300 students pass year 12, so this is something we celebrated when he said this. He could have done it too. I just read a bunch of posts seeing if any of these descriptions matched my actions at school. Guess no teachers remembered me. 2 kids in 1 week stuck their tongues on a flagpole, exactly like Christmas Story, and another on a basketball standard. During -15-degree weather, one kid left a bloody chunk of tongue on the basketball standard. Another super nice high school kid would always say thank you after class, as in, thank you for teaching us. Full stop. I am actually a teacher. The students that stand out the most are not the ones that are the smartest, or the highest scoring, or the best behaving, or the worst behaving. The ones that stand out are the ones that are unique, that march to the beat of their own drum, that bring something new to your class that you haven't seen before in X years in the classroom. This was when I taught 1st grade. I had a student who would be perfectly happy and normal. Out of the blue he would flip a switch. He would look down or away, and then look back at you with this stare. It was like he could see in your soul. It was terrifying. He would throw things, like desks, try to stab people with stuff. His parents thought starting fires and hurting the neighborhood pets was a phase. Luckily he was only in my room a few weeks before he was put into a special program. I subbed last year at a special education where there was a student that was 6 feet 8 inches and 350 pounds. He punched me square in the chest as hard as he could when he couldn't get seconds in lunch. Won't be forgetting that one anytime soon. In my current position though, I don't think there is a single student I will forget. I am a trained music teacher but my school needed a kindergarten teacher for the year, so this is my first and probably last year doing this. It's been a very interesting and rewarding job but also incredibly challenging with every student requiring such different levels of attention. I had a kinda student last year with some interesting mental health issues. He constantly lashed out physically at staff and students, but one day it was worse than others. My family always looked forward last year to me coming home to hear new stories. On this particular day my class was lining up beside another class to come in from outdoor play while C was muttering to himself about sharks and zombies, his 2 favorite things. Out of nowhere he bites another girl in the class on the lip drawing blood, and doesn't understand why she's so distraught. He starts yelling at her that tiger sharks are the strongest, and she should listen to him when he is warning her about them. One of his exact quotes was, "Next time don't doubt tiger sharks." The main issue was that this little girl wasn't even talking to him or standing near him. He imagined this whole conversation in his head. Every day was an adventure with this student, and he made so much growth while in our program. I enjoy seeing his happy face in the hallways at school now when I walk past him. Especially because he isn't in my class anymore, haha. One boy from when I was a student intern in a kindergarten classroom stands out above all others. He had been violent previously and had been sent to a mental facility and was being phased back into the public school system on the second week that I was in the classroom. So not only was I new to teaching, still getting to know the students and the school workings, but now I had a 5-year-old with a history of violence that must have been bad enough to have been removed from the school already once before. His first day back, he arrived before I got to the classroom. When I entered the room, he had already destroyed all of the desks, 25 of them, had thrown them all around the room and piled them atop one another. As I entered, he was taking the class pet bird out of the cage and ripped the head off right in front of me. Some other students saw him and started yelling and crying, and the regular classroom teacher came running in and grabbed him, and he was trying to run toward the other kids with the bloody bird pieces. I was trying to get the principal and counselor to the classroom. It was horrible. He was removed again, and in the remaining 8 weeks I was there, I never saw him again. Never did find out what happened to him. He was an amazing young boy. He could use complex differential and integral equations at the age of 15. He also had an amazing mustache. His name? Albert Einstein. I started in my first classroom this past July. It is a full special education elementary classroom. I had a very strong connection with one of the students. He had cerebral palsy and was nonverbal, but you always knew what he needed and how he was feeling. He was sweet and enjoyed life. His home life wasn't the greatest, but he loved being at school with his friends and teachers. He passed away in September. I'll never forget that horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach when the staff in my classroom got called down to the principal's office and we were told it was one of the worst things I've ever experienced. I'll always carry him with me. A kid who stabbed himself in the meat between your index finger and thumb and splattered the blood all over the room. I put post-its over all the blood marks so the custodian could find them more easily. I then tried to go about teaching after said kid was in the nurse, and when I went to erase the board, little drops of blood went streaking everywhere. A kid who joked about bringing an AR-15 to school the day after the Stoneman Douglas shootings. I called security immediately. Knowing him, I think he just didn't get how seriously people take that kind of thing, but after 4 security guards and a campus SRO came to get him, I think he got the message. A student once asked me what his sister was like when she was in high school. We had been in the same year throughout high school and then went to the same college for a bit, so I knew her pretty well, even though we weren't exactly friends. Great girl. Everyone loved her. She had this way of making you smile no matter how sad you felt. So I'm like, well, what is she up to these days? She must have recognized my name if you know we went to school together. Well, turns out she committed suicide a few months after our last semester together. Her brother was 9 at the time, and was now in my class 7 years later. He recognized me from her yearbook pictures, and just wanted to learn more about his sister from someone who got to see a different side of her. Jacob. I had Jacob all 4 years that he was in high school. Freshman year he was completely obnoxious. The kids hated being near him. He was always making off the wall comments, and nearly failed the class. Over the course of the next 3 years he totally matured and turned around his academics, eventually finishing his senior year with a B+ in my class, and he participated in a bunch of my extracurricular activities. One fun story. We were at a competition for school and he participated in a costume contest. He was supposed to be Odysseus and made his own homemade fake blood out of corn syrup and chocolate. I will always remember him horrifying the 2,000+ people there while he licked his fake blood off himself. The competition actually banned fake blood after that. I appreciated his dedication and sense of humor. He had a rough family life, so we stayed and stay in touch so I can check in on him. He's doing amazingly well in college and he was even in my wedding. Edit. Typo. Not a teacher, but about a teacher. He was the IT teacher at school and did all the networking, sysadmin etc work with no pay, but just because he enjoyed it. He was idolized by everyone he ever taught and was a man who even the kids outside of his class, kids who didn't care about school, would smoke in behind the sheds and start fights etc. Everyone loved him. He was a boxer and a carpenter before becoming a teacher. So a real man's man, but just loved IT work and kids too. Unfortunately, he developed prostate cancer 7 years ago and passed away not long after. Left a wife, twins and a daughter, kids all under 5 years old. Left a massive impact on my life. All the teachers at the school and more students than you could imagine. He had a public funeral at the town hall, with hardly any standing room left. An absolute inspiration of what a teacher should be, and it can be incredibly personal while still maintaining student-teacher professionalism. Still a man that people talk about to this day, and still an inspiration to so many who knew him. It was my first year teaching. 6th grade self-contained sped. This school was rough. Those kids challenged me every day. There were 25 students in this class. They gave me a really hard time. But I know a lot of them had issues at home on top of learning and behavior problems. I cried driving home every day for them and for me. My first unannounced observation came along. My class sat up straight in their seats and did not make a peep. Was this my class? One student, who gave me a particular hard time and was well known to admin, I noticed, was sweating, like beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Instead of calling out like usual, he raised his hand and answered a question in the most polite voice, as we all secretly couldn't believe this, when the principal left, and the entire class flopped down with relief. That was so hard, my sweating student said. I know he tried, with every bone in his body, to behave for this, to the point where he was sweating. My dear students, who drove me to the brink of crazy that year, told me they loved me and wanted to make sure I had a good observation. They had 2 teachers prior that year who quit, and they wanted to make sure I did not leave. Is anyone else reading through this wondering if they'll find a story about themselves? I had one student who had oppositional defiant disorder and spent his days being an abusive menace to everyone. He really was a nightmare and very much put me off teaching in case I ever had another student like him. I am no longer a teacher. Horrible, abusive, nasty piece of work. I really want to use stronger language. Kid that locked the bathroom door from the outside while no one was in there, causing a massive headache during an open house. Still have no idea how the ducky managed that. He also cut his hand open punching a padded wall and needed stitches. I have a short list of students who, if I ever find out, became heinous criminals later in life, I would not be surprised. Not me, but my civics teacher, who tells this story every year when he eventually gets asked what was his weirdest student. Well, a few years back when cat headbands were popular, there was a girl who would always meow in class. She never spoke a word of English but would meow every response, including from other students. Sure, she failed every quiz because she couldn't answer it verbally, but I remember she passed with like a low A or high B. Not a teacher, but I was in loco parentis for a group of CVOC, child victims of crime. One of the boys was severely disfigured. His parents had set fire to his room when he was a child, locked the doors and tried to kill him, but thankfully he was rescued, survived. I was having a tough week in work. I didn't think it was visible, but he came over to me and asked me what was wrong, and after talking said life is too short to torture yourself over the things that could have not or might happen. He must have been about 15 and showed more integrity and empathy than most people. I still think of him a lot and hope he is still as positive about life now as he was back then. Not only did he help in my current situation, he caused a butterfly effect and changed my perceptions. I like to think that I have used this experience from him to influence others in a similar situation. I'm not a teacher, I'm a para, but the kid I work with has changed my life. I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing as a para, but ended up working with a first grader born with a prenatal brain hemorrhage. It was tough. I had no real training and got thrown out with the fishes at first. It was tough. It is tough. I get hit, kicked, bit, headbutted, and he likes to slam into me when he's angry. He throws a lot of tantrums, but he's such a great kid. He's got one of the best personalities. He is one of the funniest kids I have ever met. He gets mad at technology and will get frustrated and says some funny things. Like the other day he said, "How dare you, computer? How dare you do this to me?" And I asked him what the computer did and he said, "The word was too hard for me to read." It's tough, but that kid has changed my life. Because of him I am changing my major to SPE teaching after this semester. There are lots of people like the student I work with, but I will always remember him. Dance teacher. I had a ballet class of 4-8-year-olds. As all ballet classes go, I knew I had to teach them a little French, and so I didn't dumb anything down for them. Kids are much smarter than we want them to be. Well, there is a type of kick called a Batman. I decided it would be fun to teach them this. When asked what it meant, I said kick. It means beat, but didn't know how to explain that. So in the same fashion with every other move I taught them, I had them saying the word as they were doing it. Demi-plie registered sign. Jet registered sign. etc. This one girl was the highlight of my class. Instead of saying Batman, she kept yelling kick it. And she would throw her back into the kick and everything. Undo. Choice. Quatre kick it. Undo. Choice. Quatre kick it. Undo. Choice. Quatre kick it. Her legs were everywhere and back arched and holding onto the barrier for dear life. Somehow I rolled with it, but the parents watching were in stitches. One was laying on the floor holding their side. I laugh every time I think about it. I left shortly after teaching that class, but I'll never forget her. My 7th grade English teacher told my mom at conferences that I was the worst student she had ever had. Honestly, I really enjoyed the fact that everyone else liked her and it bothered her to no end that I didn't. Terrible student who had a parent threatening to sue the school for everything the kid did wrong if we dared punish them. We said that the student isn't learning, any actions have consequences, and soon this person will be 18. The school kept caving because they didn't have the money to defend a lawsuit even if they won. Person is now an adult in jail for life for a rash of horrific and brutal crimes. Wasn't even a month after graduating they started their crime spree. I also had a student beg me to be his mom. He was in kindergarten and didn't want to go home and just pleaded with me to take him home, saying he didn't need a lot and he would be really good. It's one of the few times I couldn't keep it together and turned around and started uncontrollably sobbing in front of other students. He was being removed from his house that evening and CPS had foster care lined up for him. I hope wherever he is okay. I was 21 at the time and living in a 1-bedroom basement apartment, or I might have considered taking him.